Archaeologists are announcing discoveries all the time. Just recently, they announced the discovery of a Mayan urban center in Guatemala, a 4,000-year-old fire altar in Peru, and the tombs of 3 more ancient officials in Egypt. But with every discovery, there come more questions, and some of our materials have been puzzling archaeologists for over a century. I'm Madam Archaeologist, your go-to informant on everything archaeology, and welcome to Part 4 of Unsolved Archaeological Mysteries. First up, where is the tomb of the Egyptian pharaoh Ahmose I? King Ahmose was the founder of ancient Egypt's famous 18th dynasty. He reigned for about 25 years in the 16th century BC and is known for reunifying Upper and Lower Egypt following a period of fragmentation. Egypt's pharaonic history is divided into a series of dynasties that are grouped into larger periods depending on Egypt's political stability. The 18th dynasty marks the start of a prosperous period we call the New Kingdom. This was when ancient Egypt reached the height of its power. The famous Valley of the Kings started being used as a royal burial ground, and mummification reached its peak. Egyptologists regard the New Kingdom as a golden age in Egypt's history. The most famous 18th dynasty ruler was Tutankhamun, who reigned 2 centuries after King Ahmose, and all his fame today is thanks to the fact that his tomb was found nearly intact. But what was the reign of his lesser-known predecessor like? King Ahmose accomplished some things during his reign that makes him one of the dynasty's most important pharaohs, even if he's not as famous as some. The preceding Second Intermediate period was characterized by the fragmentation of the Egyptian state into rival kingdoms. By the time Ahmose had come to power, the Hyksos, a group from the Levant that managed to establish their own dynasty in Egypt's delta in the 17th century BC, were still ruling in the north, based at their capital of Avaris. King Ahmose is known for his successful defeat of the Hyksos and reunification of Upper and Lower Egypt under a single pharaoh once again. He was actually the brother of the last 17th dynasty pharaoh Ahmose, but because of this successful reunification of Upper and Lower Egypt, the historian Manetho, writing in the 3rd century BC, saw the event worthy enough of meriting Ahmose his own new dynasty. Manetho was a priest at Heliopolis and is actually the one originally responsible for dividing Egypt into 30 dynasties. King Ahmose also launched military campaigns in the neighboring lands of Nubia and Canaan, and he embarked on an ambitious construction program. One of his projects was a pyramid at Abydos, the last to have been commissioned by a native Egyptian pharaoh. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like much today because the pyramidal shape had been given through the limestone casing, and the interior had just been constructed from sand and rubble, which has since collapsed, and this is what visitors see today. Contrary to the claim made back in February with the official announcement of the discovery of King Thutmose II's tomb, that Thutmose's tomb was the last of the 18th dynasty pharaohs that needed to be found, we are still missing the tomb of King Ahmose I. There are no traces of burial chambers inside his pyramid, making it clear that it wasn't meant to be his tomb. Pyramids usually contain burial chambers, which has led Egyptologists to believe that they functioned as royal tombs, but the lack of any such chambers inside of King Ahmose's period rules this possibility out. The pyramid is, however, part of a larger funerary complex constructed by the pharaoh, and thus function more as a cenotaph than a tomb. A cenotaph is a monument that commemorates a person who was buried elsewhere. So, if he wasn't buried in his pyramid, where was King Ahmose buried? The Valley of the Kings, located within the vast Theban necropolis opposite modern-day Luxor, became the famed burial ground of the 18th dynasty pharaohs, who chose to be interred in rock-cut tombs. But the first pharaoh we know to have been buried in the Valley of the Kings is Thutmose I, the dynasty's 3rd pharaoh. It is likely that the tomb of King Ahmose is somewhere within the large Theban necropolis, even if not in the Valley of the Kings proper. Here's why. The mummy of King Ahmose was found in the so-called Deir el-Bahari cache, also known as the Royal Cache. This refers to a group of royal mummies who, during the 21st dynasty, were reburied in a single tomb, labeled TT320, within the Theban necropolis that belonged to a high priest. Various pharaohs from the 17th to 20th dynasties were part of the cache, and all whose tombs have been identified come from the Theban necropolis. Therefore, it makes sense that King Ahmose I had been buried somewhere here as well before his mummy was transferred to tomb TT320. There is some debate over whether the mummy truly belongs to the king. He was the full brother of his wife, Queen Ahmose Nefertari, so if we could get enough DNA out of their mummies, this could help shed light on the matter. But regardless of whether this truly is King Ahmose's mummy or not, it was still attributed to him when it entered the royal cache, suggesting that the king's tomb should be nearby. Archaeologists currently believe that a zone within the vast necropolis called Dra Abu el Naga is the most likely spot, but the tomb could really be anywhere in the region. For example, The tomb of the later 18th dynasty pharaoh Thutmose II was found in the western Wadis zone, even though his predecessor, Thutmose I, and his successor, Thutmose III, were both buried in the Valley of the Kings. With thorough surveying, sooner or later the tomb of King Ahmose will hopefully be discovered and opened for the first time, at least by archaeologists. Second, we have an ancient script that has left archaeologists perplexed for over 100 years. Linear A. Linear A is associated with the Bronze Age Minoan civilization of Crete and was used to write the Minoan language. The Minoan civilization is known for its amazing palaces, the most famous of which is the Palace of Minos at Knossos. The paint, by the way, did not survive like that. It was added under the direction of the famous British archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans, based on how he interpreted the palace's decorations, and was part of a larger restoration program at the site. Examples of Linear A have been found predominantly on the island of Crete, including at Knossos, but a few examples also come from other islands in the Aegean, mainland Greece, and even at a site in Asia Minor. Now, we know a lot about the Minoan civilization in terms of its art, palatial architecture, and extensive trade network, and we even have the DNA of the Minoans, which I'll do an episode on soon. But we haven't deciphered their writing system yet, and the language it encodes is also poorly understood. Some observations, however, have been made. Linear A is considered logosyllabic, meaning that some signs stand for words and others for syllables. It was in use from about 1800 to 1450 BC and has been found on clay documents or tablets, ceilings, and roundels, as well as on ceramic vessels and stone or metal objects. There are some examples of graffiti on palace walls too, but there's no evidence of monumental inscriptions like that seen in ancient Egypt. Another interesting artifact bearing a Linear A inscription is the so-called scepter, found at Knossos. We can deduce from all this that Linear A served an administrative purpose alongside some non-administrative, perhaps cultic purposes too. But what was actually written on the Minoan tablets and objects bearing these inscriptions remains a big mystery. We can semi-read Linear A inscriptions phonetically due to the similarities between Linear A and Linear B, which records Mycenaean Greek and has been deciphered. But Linear A still remains undeciphered at large, and we have yet to find out what the words mean. When the script finally gets deciphered, I'm optimistic that it will be one of the biggest archaeological breakthroughs. Finally, we have the very bizarre Ubaid lizard figurines. These just might be the oddest figurines you'll ever lay your eyes on. They date to the Ubaid period of ancient Mesopotamia, which lasted from about 5,500 to 4000 BC and was a time when societies in the region were increasing in socio-cultural complexity and the foundations of urbanization were being laid down. These figurines feature human bodies with non-human looking heads. I don't blame some people for thinking they're aliens. They do look somewhat like our current popular image of what aliens look like, and it's normal for the human brain to make these associations. But more terrestrial interpretations of them have been proposed, and these are what are being discussed by academics. These artifacts are called lizard men, lizard figurines, or even Ophidians, because to many they look like reptiles or snakes combined with people. But take this terminology with a grain of salt. As this one paper points out, we don't really know what the figurines are used for or what they specifically represent. Lizard figurines or Ophidians are convenient labels for us, but they may not represent how the ancient Mesopotamians saw these figurines or what they were trying to represent with them. The figurines depict both men and women, but what they were used for is essentially unknown. They have been found at Mesopotamian sites, for example at Tel el Ubaid, Tel el Uaili, Ur, and Eridu. Some come from temple contexts, making a religious or ritualistic function possible, although some have been found associated with cemeteries, others are from domestic contexts, while others are just surface finds, and some have never even had their exact find spot recorded. Still, some interpretations have been put forward. It is possible that the figurines represented deities. While any interpretation of these figurines is mere speculation due to their varied contexts and lack of written sources to guide us, this interpretation is within the realm of possible since the later Mesopotamian deities were sometimes shown as part human, part animal. Here is the goddess Ereshkigal, shown as a woman with wings and talons. And here's the well-known Lamassu. The pointed hats seen on Mesopotamian deities could have also grown out of the elongated heads and what look like these hairstyles on the Ubaid figurines. However, there are also important differences between the Ubaid figurines and the later Mesopotamian deities, rendering the exact relationship between the two uncertain. One major difference, for example, is that, excepting the Lamassu, the human aspects of the Mesopotamian deities are way more emphasized. I find it interesting, though, that one of the themes depicted amongst the Ubaid figurines is breastfeeding, as this can be found in religious iconography. Look at paintings and statues of Madonna and the Child, or Isis lactans. This is an amulet from Egypt showing the goddess Isis nursing Horus. It's clearly a religious object. This in itself is not proof of a religious function for the Ubaid figurines, but it is still an interesting similarity. If the figurines do have a religious meaning, I would not associate them with a mother goddess cult, as has been proposed for some other female figurines from prehistory. Because with the Ubaid figurines, women aren't the only subjects being depicted. We can find figurines of both females and males. That they were toys has also been proposed. However, I agree here that since they have never been found inside of children's graves, this seems unlikely. It is possible that the elongated heads represented the practice of cranial modification known from the time, and so the figurines may have been status symbols, but with the current evidence, these are all just possibilities. I'm personally curious to find out why some Ubaid figurines were deposited in tombs. The fact that they are found both within settlements and inside tombs and cemeteries makes their interpretation a bit difficult because there's no clear distinction in terms of context. They're present in the realms of both the living and the dead, although there is a supposed chronological difference, where the figurines were only found in domestic contexts during earlier phases of the Ubaid period and made their way to cemeteries later in the Ubaid period. Maybe different interpretations of the figurines are correct, or maybe we're looking at them from a completely wrong perspective and the ancient Mesopotamians are laughing at us. Anyways, the exact purpose of the Ubaid figurines and who they specifically represent still eludes us, meriting them a spot on the list of unsolved archaeological mysteries. That's it for this episode. While archaeology has no doubt enriched our understanding of the past, it's clear that we are far from having all the answers. Where is the tomb of the pharaoh Ahmose I? Will Linear A ever be deciphered? Who do the Ubaid figurines represent and what was their purpose? If you have any thoughts on these unsolved archaeological mysteries, feel free to leave a comment. Subscribe for more cool content by our go-to informant on everything archaeology, Madam Archaeologist.